Order, please. Just before we begin with the daily routine today, right off the top, I'd like to draw all members' attention to the Speaker's Gallery, where I'm pleased to welcome to our Assembly the new U.S. Consul General, Mr. Kevin Skillen, to the House. I'd like to give a warm welcome to him and his wife and his two children to Halifax as they get started on their term here in our fair province. So welcome. We'll now move on to the daily routine, beginning with presenting and reading of petitions, presenting reports of committees, tabling reports, regulations, and other papers, statements by ministers, government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Monsieur le Président, à une date ultérieure, je demanderai l'adoption de la résolution suivante. Attendu que depuis sa création en 1878, la municipalité de Clare est demeurée fidèle à sa langue, à sa culture et à son patrimoine, contribuant ainsi de façon considérable à la voix et au caractère unique de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Attendu que depuis les 250 dernières années, la municipalité de Clare a été le lieu d'origine de certains des Acadiens les plus éminents de la Nouvelle-Écosse et d'ambassadeurs de la riche diversité culturelle de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Attendu que la municipalité de Clare continue de faire connaître sa culture dynamique et son riche patrimoine à toute la Nouvelle-Écosse dans le cadre des célébrations telles que le plus ancien festival acadien de la province. Par conséquent, qu'il soit résolu que les membres de l'Assemblée législative se joignent à moi pour féliciter la municipalité de Clare à l'occasion de son 250e anniversaire. Monsieur le Président, je demande l'adoption de cette motion sans préavis et sans débat. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas since its creation in 1878, the municipality of Clare has remained true to its language, its culture, its heritage, thus contributing significantly to Nova Scotia's unique voice and character. And whereas over the past 250 years, the municipality of Clare has consistently brought forward some of Nova Scotia's most prominent Acadians and ambassadors of Nova Scotia's rich cultural diversity. And whereas the municipality of Clare continues to share its vibrant culture and rich heritage with all Nova Scotians through celebrations such as the oldest Acadian festival in the province. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly join me in congratulating the municipality of Clare on its 250th anniversary. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas our police from across the province work hard every day on behalf of their communities to protect the lives of Nova Scotians, and whereas their leadership and commitment to policing has resulted in developing innovative ways to better understand to the challenges of an ever-changing world, and whereas the dedication and commitment of our local police officers and members of the RCMP was recognized earlier this week at the Long Service Awards, where I was pleased to extend congratulations and sincere thanks to those who have served Nova Scotians for 15 and 25 years. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House join me in congratulating the members of our law enforcement community who received a medal for their long service and unwavering commitment to public service. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to make an introduction.
Permission granted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to draw the attention of the members to the East Gallery, where I'd like to introduce some special guests. And I'd ask the guests to rise when I acknowledge them. Joy Wabulu, who's a continuing care assistant at Northwood. and Josie Ryan, the Executive Director for Long-Term Care at Northwood, and Mary Lee, who's the President and CEO of the Health Association of Nova Scotia. So I ask the members to give them the warm welcome of the House.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas continuing care providers and volunteers promote the health, well-being and independence of people of all ages who require care and support in their homes and communities, and whereas important work, research and advances are being made in this sector helping to improve quality of care, and whereas Continuing Care Month is an opportunity to recognize dedicated staff and to learn more about continuing care programs and services across the province, therefore, be it resolved that all members of this legislature recognize September as Continuing Care Month. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. We'll now move on to introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 418 of the Revised Statutes of 1989, the Securities Act.
The Honourable Minister of Finance begs leave to introduce a bill, an act to amend Chapter 418 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Securities Act.
Bill number 67, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 418 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Securities Act.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 44 of the Acts of 2005, the Pre-Primary Education Act.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 44 of the Acts of 2005, the Pre-Primary Act.
Bill number 68, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 44 of the Acts of 2005, the Pre-Primary Education Act.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 494 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Vital Statistics Act.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 494 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Vital Statistics Act.
Bill number 69, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 494 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Vital Statistics Act.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill on behalf of the member from Dartmouth South, a bill entitled An Act Representing Gender-Neutral Identification.
I just love how you're trying to dig yourself out of that pre-primary sand. The sand pit.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North, on behalf of the Honourable Member for Dartmouth South, begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting Gender-Neutral Identification.
Bill number 70, entitled An Act Respecting Gender-Neutral Identification.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. We'll now move on to notices of motion. Statements by members. The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Mr. Speaker, the Abercrombie Country Club hosted an event for the Soldier On program, which toured the Atlantic provinces during this summer.
This program, which is run by PGA of Canada and the Canadian Armed Forces, is designed to recruit ill and injured veterans and service personnel to play golf. Through this sport, veterans become more active again and also reap the therapeutic effects which are beneficial for those suffering from PTSD. Through this program and the venues which host them, the program has raised enough funds this year to have 15 ill and injured veterans from the Atlantic region play golf together, a total of $62,000. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the PGA, the Abercrombie Country Club, and the Canadian Forces for what they are doing for veterans who have given so much to us. Thank you so much.
The honourable member for Halifax, Armdale.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to mark a special occasion in the life of two young, bright constituents, David MacDonald and Christine Strongman. David and Christine started a new chapter in their lives as they celebrated their marriage on September 12th after being together for 8 years. Many of their family and friends gathered to witness them commit their relationship publicly and officially at their wedding celebration ceremony in Las Vegas. The newlyweds are both involved members of our Halifax-Armdale community, and I was glad to meet them on the campaign trails as they were preparing to purchase their first new home in Armdale. I ask all members of the House of Assembly to congratulate the couple on their wedding and wish them a life marked by many happy, healthy years. Merci.
The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to wish the Amherst Ramblers and their coach, Jeff LeBlanc, good luck in their upcoming season. They have already scored a shutout in one of their preseason games. Goalie Joel Gauguin stopped all 20 shots during the game. This year, the Ramblers welcome new goalie Matt Williams to their team. The Ramblers games usually attract over 500 fans to the Amherst Stadium and is a big part of the Cumberland's fall-winter activities. Mr. Speaker, I ask all MLAs to join me in wishing the Ramblers a successful hockey season. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Cole Harbour, Portland Valley.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this past spring and summer, I was pleased to co-host a small business roundtable intended to address some of the challenges small businesses are facing in our community. The roundtable discussions engaged 12 to 14 local business owners and took place over a span of 3 months, consisting of one, a facilitated session each month. And working as a group, we were able to identify 3 core items that participants wanted to address. 1, develop a shop local initiative, develop recurring business expos, and 2, create use of existing local attractions and bring new attractions to our area. With over 180 small businesses and over 30 nonprofits active in my constituency and partnerships with the Cole Harbour and Area Business Association, we are now focusing on bringing community partners together to create task force to get the ball rolling on all the exciting initiatives. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask that everybody join me in thanking the Cole Harbour Business Association for helping us do this.
The member from Cape Breton, Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I rise to recognize the first Gender Equality Week in Canada, September 23rd to 29th. This important initiative recognizes benefits for women, men, and all gender identities. Mr. Speaker, gender equality benefits all Canadians and the country as a whole by promoting fairness, economic prosperity, health, happiness, peace, and security. Mr. Speaker, while much progress has been made, there is still much to be done. Mr. Speaker, I call upon all members of the House to acknowledge and recognize the continued efforts that individuals across our province and our country have put forth in an effort to advance awareness and the importance of gender equality in today's society. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate owner and executive chef Mark Gray and the entire team at the Watch That Ends the Night. In less than a year since Mark took over as owner, it has garnered the accolade of Best New Bar in Canada by En Route magazine. Nestled in King's Wharf on the Dartmouth side of the harbour, the Watch and its team have put passion, heart, soul, and a whole lot of work into making the bar and restaurant what it is, and there's more to come. In less than a month, they'll open their new 12-person dining room, Cassiopeia, dedicated to creating unique and noteworthy culinary experiences for their guests. I'm excited to be able to rise in the House today and give credit to a small bar in Dartmouth that has gained such national attention. I'd ask my colleagues to join me in congratulating Mark Gray, Executive Chef Janie Bogardus, and the entire crew of the Watch That Ends the Night. They've made Dartmouth very proud.
The member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to recognize Kathy Pelrine of Timberley. Kathy is a wonderful community member who routinely ensures that my office is aware of activities and issues within the community. Kathy and her husband Bill are both engaged community members who have a keen interest in what is happening in their neighbourhood and have served with several organizations over the years. If there is a community meeting being held, Kathy is always in attendance. She likes to keep herself informed as to what is happening. She pays attention to things that can be improved, such as noting the location of potholes and reporting them to me so that they can be taken care of. Kathy is the kind of person who works with her elected officials for the betterment of the community. I would like the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly to join me in thanking Kathy for her community spirit and wish her well into the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to thank the students of City Mines Middle School and their art teacher, Sharon Brennan. The students were asked to create murals to cover the last 3 units of the red brick road built in 1830. Most of the family units in this building have been rehabilitated for public housing, but funding dried up before the last 3 units could be addressed. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the students who participated in this venture and learned the history of the red brick road. Their community service is very much appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Sydney Whitney Pier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize Scott Morrison from Sydney. Scott is a local entrepreneur. He's had a chain of very successful restaurants, Flavor Restaurant in Sydney. He has multiple locations, but most importantly, he's celebrating 10 successful years in business. Scott is a champion in the community. He's involved with many organizations, and through his businesses, he's been very successful and hired many local residents of the CBRM. So, Mr. Speaker, I rise in my place to recognize Scott Morrison for his success and wish him all the best in his 10-year anniversary of Flavor Restaurant. Thank you.
The member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over the next couple of days, schools and students around the province will be marking Orange Shirt Day by encouraging their students to wear orange shirts in support of residential school survivors. Rooted in our troubled history, Orange Shirt Day is a specific reference to Phyllis Webstad's story. Upon arriving at the mission, her bright orange shirt that her grandmother had saved up for to buy for her first day of school was stripped from her and never returned. She wrote of the experience, "The color orange has always reminded me of that, and how my feelings didn't matter, and how no one cared, and how I felt like I was worth nothing. All of us little children were crying, and no one cared." Mr. Speaker, reconciliation includes truthful accounts of history that need to begin early. We can't reconcile if we don't remember, if we don't acknowledge the intergenerational trauma that our residential school legacy resulted in. It's important for these schools to participate in Orange Shirt Day, and it's important that Indigenous education has a home in all of our school programs. Only by informing the next generation can we ensure that the horrors of our colonial past are reconciled and healing can begin. Thank you.
The member for Fairview Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize Erin Beattie, a recent graduate of Fairview Junior High School, for being recognized at the Nova Scotia School Athletic Federation luncheon this spring with the Exemplary Participation Award. Erin excelled both academically and in a variety of athletics, specifically soccer, while at Fairview Junior High. Claudine White, the Director of Sales and Marketing at Eastlink, had the pleasure of presenting Erin with this prestigious award. Erin was also accredited with the title of Female Athlete of the Year, selected by the staff at Fairview Junior High. As Erin enters her first year at Halifax West, I know that she will continue to exceed expectations amongst her peers. And Mr. Speaker, I ask the members of this House join me in recognizing Erin Beattie for her remarkable athletic and academic career during her time at Fairview Junior High School, and wish her the best of luck as she continues on in her high school career. Thank you.
The member for Queen Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate the Queen's County Fair Association on this year's County Fair, which took place between September 18th and the 22nd. This is the only remaining county fair in Nova Scotia that uses the original heritage buildings. It has remained a true agriculture fair since its inception in 1886, including a street parade, horse, beef, and oxen competitions, plus produce and craft exhibits. Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate the association and all their volunteers who worked tirelessly through the year to bring this event together, preserving and enhancing the buildings and grounds and preserving a real step back in time agriculture fair. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Waverley Fall River, Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to congratulate Beaverbank resident Emily Elford, a grade 9 student at Lockview High School, on her amazing win at the Canadian Dart Nationals in Quebec. Emily won the 2018 Canadian Youth Dart Championship. This win qualifies Emily to compete for the Canada at the World Masters Dart Championships taking place later this month in England, as well as taking home a bursary of $1,000. Mr. Speaker, we wish Emily the best of luck when she competes in London and thanks the community for the support they have given her. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Sydney River, Mire, Lewisburg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate the Coxheath Wilderness Recreation Association, which won the Trail Group of the Year award from the Nova Scotia Trails Federation. The Nova Scotia Trails Federation attributes hard work from volunteers like those in the Coxheath Group for trail development in this province. The Coxheath Wilderness Recreation Association was founded in 2006 with the goal of enhancing the understanding of nature through wilderness experiences. While they look after the trails near the intersection of Blackest Lake Road and the Coxheath Road, throughout the year, they also sponsor a variety of events, including the annual Hike the Coxheath Colours in Cayley, which takes place in October. Mr. Speaker, I stand today to congratulate the Coxheath Wilderness Association on winning this award and to acknowledge and thank the many volunteers who make the Coxheath Wilderness Recreation Association such a success. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Chester St. Margaret.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to congratulate the members of the St. Barnabas Anglican Church in Blandford for another successful turkey supper held last Saturday. Although the annual dinner raises money for the St. Barnabas Church, now in its 80th year, volunteers from the wider community, from Deep Cove to Northwest Cove, step up to help prepare, cook, and serve, all of which is masterfully watched over by principal organizer Samantha Murphy, ably assisted by Bev McDonald. Reverend Louis Quinnell, pastor of St. Barnabas, reported that there was a long line stretching out from the Blandford Community Centre waiting for the first sitting to start. Guests, including myself, were served over 400 delicious turkey suppers with all the fixings, dessert, tea and coffee in just under 1.5 hours. Mr. Speaker, I ask the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly to join me in congratulating St. Barnabas Church on their annual fundraising event and wish them continued success in their future endeavours. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to acknowledge the inspiring young Canadians I've had the pleasure to meet at 848, the Scots Highland Army Cadet Corps that parade in Dartmouth East. Whenever I get the opportunity to visit these amazing young people, I'm inspired. Mr. Speaker, these youth are developing life and work skills that stick with you for the rest of your life. More than that, Mr. Speaker, it is the lifelong friends and memories they are making as members of the Army Cadets. On a personal note, Mr. Speaker, there was a time when the person before you was not very confident. I owe so much to my experiences at 803 North Shore Sabre Air Cadet Squadron. They pushed me out of my comfort zone and taught me the skills that have stuck with me all this time. Mr. Speaker, I ask the members of this House to join me in recognizing Nova Scotia's future leaders from 848 Army Cadet Corps and all cadets across Nova Scotia and Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Lunenburg.
Mr. Speaker, the Mahone Bay Founders Society established the Heritage Awards to recognize individuals, groups, or projects that have made lasting contribution to the conversation of heritage in the town of Mahone Bay. I rise today to recognize the recipients of the 2018 Heritage Awards: the Calvary Temple for the restoration work on their church and hall, Meg Craig and Justin Weens for the barn for adaptive reuse of a heritage structure, the Summer Troop Glimpses for increasing awareness through theatrical and musical performance, Owen Casabaugh, who received the Youth Award for his Heritage Fair project, The Three Churches. Mr. Speaker, I would ask that you and all members of this House of Assembly please join me in congratulating the 2018 Mahone Bay Heritage Awards recipients. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Pictou Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I often hear my colleagues talk about their wonderful constituency assistants. There's no question in my mind that I have the best constituency assistant in the province. Brenda Wilson has been a very valuable employee in the Pictou Centre office since 2013. She's one of the most competent, dedicated professional employees I have met in a workforce. Whether she is assisting constituents experiencing problems with child protective services, housing, health problems, or a variety of other issues, she offers a smile and isn't satisfied with her effort until the job is done. Brenda puts her heart and soul into each and every constituent she helps. I am very grateful to have her as an assistant. She does her work so well, pleasantly and professionally. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, and I would say she probably makes you look good. The member from Clayton Park West.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to recognize a dedicated volunteer and environmentalist from my riding. Richard Vincent is one of the founding directors of the Friends of Blue Mountain Birch Cove Lakes Society and a member of the CARP Nova Scotia Environment Committee. He also volunteers with the Nova Scotia Nature Trust and the Halifax Northwest Trails Association. Aside from the environmental work, Mr. Vincent also lends time to Planned Parenthood, Phoenix House, United Way, Dumbreck Soccer Club, the Halifax Hawks, and the Masqua Aquatic Club. Mr. Speaker, I ask that the members of this House of Assembly join me in thanking Richard for his numerous contributions to nature and to the community at large. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize a group of talented young step dancers attending Sarah School of Music in Bedeck. With encouragement and training from owner-instructor Sarah Dorn, the group competed at the First Island Step Dance Competition in Prince Edward Island on June 23rd. The Bedeck crew, which was a group dance featuring all 9 dancers, won silver in their category. Besides the group dance, individual dancers had great success as well. In the 10-year-old category, Elsie Lowatis received gold, David Ross received silver, and Hannah Phillips received bronze. In the duo trio 10-year-old groups, Elsie Lowatis and David Ross received gold for their duo performance and also took home the top award of top duo trio performance of the competition. I rise today to ask all members of this legislature to join me in congratulating the Bedeck crew on their success, and a special congratulations to both Elsie and David for their gold and silver places. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, September 24th was Take Your MLA to Work Day for the Pharmacy Association. Mr. Speaker, I changed it up a bit this year and brought my 2 young daughters.
Madam Speaker.
Or Madam Speaker. Can I start over, Madam Speaker?
You have 51 seconds.
What? Okay. Madam Speaker, September 24th was Take Your MLA to Work Day for the Pharmacy Association. Madam Speaker, I changed it up a bit this year and brought my 2 young daughters, Rafina and Isla, with me. Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank pharmacist Kurt Ryan and all the staff at the Spryfield Shoppers for their generosity and being very loving and caring to my 2 young daughters. I think they created 2 future science students. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Pictou West had two tremendous athletes take part in the Canadian National Special Olympics in Antigonish. Lucy Rogers from River John participated in athletics, and Kara Scott from Scottsburn participated in rhythmic gymnastics. We know how difficult training for these events can be and the focus and dedication that is required to perform at your best. Madam Speaker, everyone in Pictou West is proud of these athletes for the many hours of hard work they have put in to excel in their sports. Madam Speaker, it is a true pleasure to congratulate Lucy and Kara on competing in the Canadian National Special Olympic Games and to wish them all well in their future endeavours. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Madam Speaker, this week saw the closure and dismantling of the Waiting Room, a small, flexible black box theatre located in the space that used to house the old bus station on Almond Street in Halifax. The creation of the Waiting Room was the result of the vision, passion, and hard work of sisters Catherine McClellan and Janet McClellan, who were also the driving forces behind Kazan Theatre Co-op. 4 years ago, Kazan was looking for space in which they could rehearse and perform their theatre productions, space that was and still is extremely hard to find in HRM. Through their hard work and leadership, the industrial space was transformed into a viable and popular venue that ended up hosting the work of 18 local theatre and film companies and productions, including my own. Sadly, the building is being repurposed and Halifax's theatre scene is losing yet another affordable place to work and produce its world-class offerings. The lack of usable space in HRM is a major issue for our working artists. I want to thank Catherine and Janet and all who worked with them to make the Waiting Room a reality. For their dedication, courage, and passion to our local theatre community, the Waiting Room will be dearly missed.
I recognize the honourable member for Kings South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the entrepreneurial spirit is alive and well throughout the Annapolis Valley, and one local man exemplifies this spirit as much as anyone. Today, I would like to recognize Jeremy Novaks of Wolfville for his innovations in business and unbridled enthusiasm, passion, and energy for his local community. In June 2008, Jeremy developed Valley Ghost Walks and continues to write, act, recruit, and promote this must-see local attraction. He's one of the original managers of our well-read and trusted community paper, The Grapevine. For 6 years, he's been the lead guide for thousands of wine enthusiasts visiting the fabulous wineries of the Annapolis Valley on board the Magic Wine Bus. Recently, Jeremy has started Where It's At Tours, which invites travelers to create their own adventures. I invite all members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly to join me in thanking Jeremy Novaks for his entrepreneurial spirit and remarkable contributions to the vitality of the beautiful Annapolis Valley. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to recognize Pastor Bill Martin of the Pugwash Memorial Baptist Church. The church hosted a First Responders Memorial Service and luncheon in honor of those who protect the community. This is the 7th year they've put on the thank you service for the RCMP, EHS, and firefighters who give us so much all to be safe. Mr. Speaker, I want to join my voice to that of Pastor Martin and thank all of our brave and dedicated first responders. I also want to extend a sincere thank you to Pastor Martin for his ongoing support of our first responders. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to recognize the Bridgewater Barracuda Swim Club. The Cudas clinched their 8th straight provincial championships in Bedford in August. The team finished 64 points ahead of the host Bedford Beavers, a finish many believe to be the closest in the history of the summer swimming provincial championships. Sarah Johnson set a 50-metre backstroke provincial record, while Travis Smith broke the 50-metre backstroke record as well. Travis, Jonathan Haas, Sarah Johnson, Thomas Owen, and Mariah Kelly were named to the provincial all-star team. I'd ask members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly to join me in congratulating the Bridgewater Barracuda Swim Club, the 2018 Nova Scotia Summer Swimming Provincial Champions, a fun and inclusive team with amazing spirit. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton Richmond.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Lieutenant Colonel Rochelle Hood of Île-Madame and a former classmate of mine on her recent posting as administrator of the Naval Hospital at the Stadacona Base in Halifax. Lieutenant Colonel Hood grew up in Petit de Gras on Île-Madame and attended Île-Madame District High, graduating in 1988. She served as a health services officer for the Department of National Defence since July of 1990. Madam Speaker, it is always an honour to be able to recognize the achievements of those living in my constituency. However, it is equally a moment of celebration when a member of our community who has left to serve her country, works hard to achieve her professional goals, and then returns home to serve in Nova Scotia. Madam Speaker, I ask the House to join me in sending our congratulations to Lieutenant Colonel Rochelle Hood for becoming the new administrator of the Stadacona Base Naval Hospital in Halifax. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Bedford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to tell the House about a Bedford volunteer who passed away suddenly in June. Philip Cox was a dedicated Nova Scotia government employee, husband, father, and volunteer. He was a role model who encouraged people to be better. At TIR, Philip was a dependable master problem solver. At home, he was a loving partner and role model for his daughters. At church, he lived his faith and was dedicated beyond all measure to his church, Bedford Baptist, where he was the chair of trustees. In fact, one of his final gifts to the church was an application to the Community Facilities Improvement Program for renovations to the children's facilities. And since Philip was thorough and professional, it was a successful application. No one knew that, though, until a month after he passed. Philip was only 61 years old, and our thoughts go out to his family, wife Diane, daughters Stephanie, Jennifer, and Heather, and their families, and to his extended family, friends, golfing buddies, and fellow parishioners. Philip Cox was a special man, and he leaves his friends and family saddened by his loss, but richer for having known him.
I recognize the honourable member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to congratulate Queens County Community Radio on their 10th anniversary. This local radio station was officially launched on June 19, 2008 and acquired its full license on September 15, 2009. Since June 2012, it has been operated by the not-for-profit CJQC Radio Society, entertaining with a assortment of music and interesting community information. From contemporary to blues to country and old-time favorites, there is something for everyone. Madam Speaker, I would like to commend the Society and all its volunteers who produce interesting and varied programming, fundraise, and work tirelessly to keep the local radio station going. Congratulations, and here's to the next 10 years. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Shannon Benoit, a resident of Valley, is co-owner of CrossFit Blue Nose in Bible Hill. In February 2018, she decided to take up the sport of Olympic weightlifting. She journeyed to Quebec to participate in the Canadian and Pan Am Masters Olympic Weightlifting Championships. Not knowing what to expect since she had never competed at that level, she set personal goals to achieve. Shannon surpassed those goals by setting new national and Pan Am records in the 36K class for female lifters between the ages of 40 and 44. During the national competition, she also established new marks in the snatch, clean and jerk, and the total. At Pan Am's, she achieved a new record in the clean and jerk of 82 kg. The competition was made even more special by the attendance of her parents, who traveled from Kingston, Ontario, to see her compete for the first time. Madam Speaker, they were not disappointed.
I recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In the West Gallery, we have 24 grade 12 students from Prince Andrew High School from the Global Politics class. With them are their two amazing teachers, Mr. Rodney St. Pierre and Mr. Ben Sechel. I had the honour of teaching with Mr. Sechel and Mr. St. Pierre for over a decade at Prince Andrew High School. I asked Mr. Sechel and Mr. St. Pierre and the class to please stand to receive the warm welcome of the House of Assembly. Madam Speaker, I rise today to celebrate one of the most impressive people I've had the pleasure of meeting since getting elected, Colin McRae. Colin is a force of nature. You are hard-pressed to go to a community event in Dartmouth without seeing Colin's smiling face somewhere. Madam Speaker, whether he's filling produce packs with the mobile food market, lobbying NSCC on behalf of the Age-Friendly Community Committee, or finding guest speakers for the Port Wallace Seniors Lunch and Learn, Colin doesn't seem to take a break. Madam Speaker, I'm so happy to have met Colin and heard about his impressive career. Our community in Dartmouth would be a lesser place without the incredible work Colin does. Madam Speaker, join me in celebrating Colin McRae and the positivity he brings to all of Dartmouth. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to congratulate the Annapolis Valley Giant Vegetable Growers on their 10th annual competition and weigh-off held on September 22nd at Glad Gardens in Waterville. They are a group of enthusiasts formed to bring together giant vegetable growers to share their knowledge and experience with young and old. The idea for this event came to light over a cup of coffee at Tim Hortons when Jeff Reed, Andy Hamilton, Brian Keneally, Wayne Knox met and advanced a plan. While the heaviest pumpkin gets great attention, vegetables are judged from the tallest sunflower to the heaviest tomato, watermelon, and squash. A crowd favorite is always the most odd or unusual giant vegetable. This year, Daryl and Maureen Tingley from Fredericton stole the show with a 1,808-pound pumpkin. Congratulations to AVGVG as they continue to grow and gain further international membership, and best of luck in making the 2019 event even bigger and better. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The staff at Marine Atlantic are used to shuffling passengers from point to point, but over the last couple of weeks, they've moved some passengers that didn't actually leave the dock with them. The staff at Marine Atlantic have made two rescues at sea in the past 2 weeks. Just 2 weeks ago, they rescued 3 fishermen that had to abandon a ship after their vessel caught fire. They were bobbing in the ocean for 2 hours before the staff of the MV Leif Erikson came to their rescue. So that was a wonderful rescue at sea for them. And over the past week, the staff of the MV Highlanders rescued a sailboat that was in distress at sea. So a tip of the hat to the staff at Marine Atlantic for all the fine things they do and being steady at the ready to rescue people at sea. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I recognize the honourable member for Antigonish.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to let you know that my son Will turns 11 today and invite all members to join me in wishing him a very happy birthday. And Madam Speaker, Will says all he wants for his birthday is for his dad not to have any questions during question period. Who knows? Maybe today's that day.
I recognize the honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, or Madam Speaker, I would like to take a moment to congratulate my good friend and local hearing cover, Tim Brown, on his completion yesterday of the Pacific Crest Trail. Tim hiked over 4,264 kilometers from the Mexican border to Canada, all the while raising money for the Canadian Paraplegic Association. Tim documented his travels through social media, documenting all the beautiful sights and new friends he met along the way, including the member from Kingsell's son, Simon. So congratulations, Tim and Simon, on their amazing accomplishments. We're all proud of you.
I recognize the honourable member for Clare Digby.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On June 22, 2018, the Digby and Area Board of Trade presents its Business Awards of Excellence at its annual awards banquet. Since 2004, the Board of Trade has presented these awards to people nominated by locals as well as visitors to our area. The Lifetime Achievement Award given to a business or individuals who have made significant contributions within the context of their career went to Ed's Takeout founder Ed Francis and the Digby Salvage and Disposal owner Richard Thomas. Excellent awards were presented to Briar Island Whale and Seabird Cruises for hospitality and tourism, to Le Transport de Clare and Sports Entertainment Atlantic for community contribution, to Lazy Bear Brewing for entrepreneurship, to the Crow's Nest Restaurant for customer service, to Weber's Bottle Exchange for environmental service, to Glen Dunn for business excellence, to Birch Street Seafoods for achieving in exporting, and to Wendy's Yard and Garden for being a rising star, and to Kevin Ellis for being an ambassador for our area. Thanks to the Board of their Trade for their support of our local businesses and honouring the excellence in our community, and congratulations to all the winners. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Guysborough, Eastern Shore, Tracadie.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to commend Amanda MacDonald of Erinville for her continued efforts in supporting the Erinville and District Volunteer Fire Department. She has been a member for the past 10 years and takes an active role in the various fundraisers and events put on by her department. She also sits on the Board of Directors, which includes monthly meetings and fire practices. Along with her work with the Volunteer Fire Department, Amanda is also a lead organizer for Erinville Come Home Days, a two-day event packed with family activities, food vendors, a community dance, and a very popular woodsman competition. The event is attended by the entire community, and Amanda puts in many long hours, making sure that each event is well cared for. Mr. Speaker, Amanda MacDonald is a very charitable person who takes the initiative to chip in where needed. Her role in the community of Erinville is invaluable, and for that, I commend her. Thank you.
I recognize the honourable member for Halifax-Arndale.
Madam Speaker, music is good for the soul. This summer, I was invited by my constituent Bert Walker to take in a very special performance in Armdale. Alongside a group of residents at Ramsgate Lane, I was treated to an hour-long performance of selections of the music of Bach, Beethoven, Satie, Bartók, and more by the enchanting Gatto Dolce Duo. The duo, composed of Colin Matthews on cello and Max Casper on bass, has been playing together for some 20 years and have performed all over the country. Their style combines great chamber music with humorous anecdotes on the life and times of the composers whose work they showcase, and I can tell you that the audience loved it. I was happy to have had a chance to see them perform and encourage all members to check out their recently completed first CD, Gatto Dolce Duo, Duet for Cello and Bass. I want to thank my great constituent, Bert Walker. Merci.
I recognize the honourable member for Cole Harbour, Portland Valley.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. Today I rise to celebrate the entrepreneurial spirit. I am pleased to acknowledge one of these new ventures. I'd like to welcome Party On People to my constituency. Party On People is a laser tag and Nerf gaming facility with over 6,500 square feet an arena. In fact, this is the largest indoor gaming area in Nova Scotia, and it houses the only on-site Nerf gaming in the province. Party On People provides a fun alternative recreational activity for young people and adults. In collaboration with the local nonprofit, there are plans to develop this space into an exciting community recreational facility. They are located at 899 Portland Street. I invite everyone to come check this place out and experience some of the great team building and lots of active fun. Party On People is not just a place for kids to party, it is also a place for adults. It will provide our area.
Time's allotted. I recognize the honourable member for Fairview, Clayton Park.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize Dr. Heidi Wigand of Mount St. Vincent University, who has just launched a new nonprofit leadership program. Dr. Wigand is a full-time professor of the Business and Tourism Department at Mount St. Vincent, has had tremendous success in her career with jobs at both IBM and Xerox. She is passionate about youth leadership, which is apparent in her role as chair of the board for Motivate Canada. Dr. Wigand has just completed her PhD in management at St. Mary's University, which will aid her in spearheading this new program. By allowing students to build connections within the area of study, the nonprofit leadership program will provide students with the skills needed to excel in the workforce. Students will gain hands-on experience while developing leadership skills, which are important in pursuing a post-secondary education. Mount St. Vincent University is an outstanding educational institution that provides students with numerous opportunities while exposing them to an exceptional faculty, as seen in the work of Dr. Wigand. Madam Speaker, I rise today and ask the members to join me in congratulating Dr. Wigand and the Mount St. Vincent University community for their efforts in providing students with exceptional opportunities. Thank you.
I recognize the honourable member for Waverley, Fall River, Beaver Bay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to congratulate the Girls Metro West Force Bantam AA hockey team for winning the Bantam AAA Atlantic hockey title. Lucy Phillips is a goalie for the team and attends George P. Vanier Junior High School in Fall River. She is in grade 8 and is very proud of how her teammates played together, which allowed them to win the Atlantic hockey title in May. Mr. Speaker, I ask the members of the legislature to congratulate all the girls of the Metro West Force Bantam AA hockey team for winning this important title. Thank you so much.
The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to congratulate the firm of Deep Chirogenics International, a startup tech company we recently welcomed to the constituency of Chester St. Margaret's. Deep Chirogenics was recognized recently by Innova Corp and awarded a $45,000 Spark Innovation Challenge grant. The Spark Innovation Grant is awarded through competitions to startup businesses with a new knowledge-based product or service to encourage innovation and economic growth. Deep Chirogenics International has been exploring a cold temperature process called Deep Chirogenic Treatment to reduce corrosion. This process has significant implications for reduced maintenance costs for such things as subsea equipment, gas turbine and wind power generators, electric vehicle gears, and industrial bearings. Mr. Speaker, I invite the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly to join me in congratulating Deep Chirogenics International on their successful Spark Innovation Challenge win and to wish them great success as they move their innovative technology firm forward in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Clayton Park West.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to recognize a young lady who uses her gifts and talents to help her fellow students. Stephanie McDeasy tutors math and science at Dalhousie University. She also sits on the Dalhousie Student Union and hosts functions for students. Stephanie is a member of the Microbiology Society and is a current vice president of the university's Arabic Society. She also donates her own art to the Dalhousie Art Gallery. Mr. Speaker, I ask that the members of this House of Assembly join me in commending Stephanie for the many ways that she gives back on campus. And thank you, Stephanie, for all you do. Thank you.
The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just rise today to give a shout out to our clerk, who's well known to the members in here, Mr. Neil Ferguson. Massive Jimmy Buffett fan. Met him 3 times. Founder of the Parrot Heads North, and an excellent clerk in this House as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Barb Thompson retired in July after serving as the director of Bridgewater's Desbrizet Museum for 11 years. Barb's career also included 8 years as the curator for the Cumberland County Museum and Archives and several years in community development. Barb played a key role in the Desbrizet Museum receiving the highest evaluation for community museums in Nova Scotia in 2016. She's most proud, however, about the interviews the museums recorded on elders from the community, which captured their childhood memories and experiences growing up in Lunenburg County. She was also honoured to assist with the preparation of 14 interpretive panels that showcase the history of Bridgewater and its connection to the Lahave River. Barb believes that the Desbrizet Museum and the Wild Carting Mill, which she also managed, provide a tangible record of the community's past. She also feels that the museum brings great value to the community, providing a space for art and culture and a place for showcasing our community's traditions, celebrations, milestones, and accomplishments. Barb's passion for history shone through her every day. Congratulations and best wishes to Barb Thompson on her retirement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to oral questions put by members to ministers. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We have been after this government for some time to provide Nova Scotians with more detail on its proposed cap-and-trade tax. The Premier has been reluctant to share those details. The Minister of Environment has been reluctant to share those details. We've asked how much will it cost Nova Scotians? No answer. We've asked How is it going to work? No answer. Then we find out that Nova Scotians won't get to hear about it until the Prime Minister signs off on it. Could the Premier please explain why Nova Scotians are second in line to hear about a plan that they will have to pay for?
The Honourable Premier.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member is incorrect. What we have said is that we're going into the Department of Environment. There's a number of benchmarks associated with your own plan. We needed to make sure we met those benchmarks, which we have through the entire process, working with the Federal Department of Environment. We will hear back from them sometime this month, and we'll communicate the results to Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
The Premier of Saskatchewan will challenge the carbon tax in court. The Premier of Ontario will challenge the carbon tax in court. One of the premiers in New Brunswick will challenge the carbon tax in court. However, this Premier challenges Ottawa to go ahead and tax everybody. The Premier was quoted on Tuesday as saying he thinks the Prime Minister should impose the carbon tax on everybody. Why is the Premier in such a rush to get into the pockets of Nova Scotians?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, that's not what I said, Mr. Speaker. She's completely incorrect. What I have said, Mr. Speaker, is we have a cap-and-trade system inside of Nova Scotia that will continue to move, that will smooth it out across our entire sectors. But I've also said to the Prime Minister very clearly that if he does not impose the backstop on those other provinces who have not done the hard work that Nova Scotians have done, we will continue to do what we have been doing. But if I followed the path of some premiers who are on their path to go to court, Mr. Speaker, which I believe the federal government has its right to do what it's doing, I would be going down that path to have the federal government impose a 10 or 12 cent litre tax gasoline on the people of Nova Scotia, and I just simply won't do that.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on her final supplementary.
Fact is, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, it's going to cost Nova Scotians hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. The Premier has said that the Prime Minister promised to impose a carbon tax and that the Prime Minister should follow through on that promise. The Premier promised to make the FOIPOP Commissioner an officer of this House. The Premier promised to run the most transparent and accountable government in Canada. The Premier promised a doctor for every Nova Scotian. Does the Premier think he might be putting a little too much faith in his promises?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell all Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, they've done a tremendous job in reducing the greenhouse gases across our province for decades, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank them for the continued work. They allowed us, Mr. Speaker, to use the carbon credits that have existed, that have been earned by Nova Scotians, and when it comes to the power side, to be able to smooth it out across the entire sectors. And the other thing they should be grateful for, Mr. Speaker, is that they did not elect a Conservative government in this province, because everything would be costing more because their appetite to go to court instead of standing up and defending the pocketbooks of Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Often when members of the opposition ask the Premier about things that are challenging for us in Nova Scotia, the Premier responds with a recitation of things like the provincial credit rating and population levels and youth retention, as though this were somehow establishing the government's unprecedented record. But these are, Mr. Speaker, half stories. Take the credit rating. Bond ratings are only meaningful when they account for fundamentals. Some fundamentals about our situation in Nova Scotia. We have got the highest percentage of people with low income of any province, and we've got the highest percentage of people with credit delinquencies. And so I want to ask the Premier, wouldn't he be better off to acknowledge frankly where we are in Nova Scotia than to try to paint an economic picture that is incompletely true?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to tell the Honourable Member I appreciate his questions. He would know in 2013 Nova Scotians gave us the privilege to be the government. We inherited a $500 million hole, Mr. Speaker, that cost of managing that was going up, Mr. Speaker. Our inability to continue to invest in programs that Nova Scotians relied on, Mr. Speaker, was affected by that. What we did in a period of time, Mr. Speaker, is put us back to the fiscal health that is allowing us to make the largest tax cut. We directed it towards low-income Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've created a graduate opportunities program which is attaching more young people to the workforce in this province, Mr. Speaker. More people are working in Nova Scotia now, Mr. Speaker, than they ever have before. Mr. Speaker, we continue to see the population grow, and we're going to continue, Mr. Speaker, to put ourselves on a good fiscal position so that we continue to make strategic investments to improve the lives of Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Well, the litany continues. Often this litany contains an element about the province's current population level. But this is a case in point. Population levels of themselves don't really mean very much. In fact, our greatest increase in Nova Scotia population ever outside of the baby boom was during the Great Depression. And that wasn't because our fundamentals were sound. The truth at the moment is that RBC is predicting for Nova Scotia in 1819 to have the second slowest provincial GDP growth in the country. Wouldn't the Premier be better off to square up to the hard facts of our situation than to respond with difficult questions with evasions and deflections?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable for the question. Again, I want to tell him, Mr. Speaker, that every economic measure, Mr. Speaker, this province is moving in the right direction. Mr. Speaker, we've seen it and heard it, Mr. Speaker, at every bank, Mr. Speaker, at the federal level. When it came to the Audits Committee, Mr. Speaker, we're one of the only two Canadian provinces on a sustainable path, Mr. Speaker. He is absolutely right. Our population is at an all-time high. The stats were out today. Almost 960,000 people are living in this province today, a new high. But what's also important, Mr. Speaker, more people are working in this province too, Mr. Speaker, than ever before. That's a positive scene. What we're doing, Mr. Speaker, is continuing to grow the population, which is in turn growing the economic opportunities for all Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Let us record this word for word precisely. Every economic indicator in Nova Scotia is going in the right direction. So let's just register this one economic indicator. Youth unemployment rate is at 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th of provinces in Canada. It is today 10th of all the provinces of Canada at 16.4%. Wouldn't the public be better served if the Premier would speak squarely to the real situation of people's real lives?
Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy you raised the question, Mr. Speaker. When they were in power, youth unemployment was at 19%, Mr. Speaker. It is going in the right direction, Mr. Speaker. It's going down, Mr. Speaker. More young people are taxing the workforce, Mr. Speaker, than ever before. Mr. Speaker, I was at Volta last night. I can't tell you how optimistic young people are and how grateful they are that this government is in power.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, today, about an hour before House was scheduled to sit, the Minister of Internal Services or Internal Affairs released the Information Access and Privacy Services Annual Report. The report covered the 2017-2018 fiscal year, April 1, 2017 to March 31st, 2018. And we all know that between March 3rd and 5th, 2018, the government's FOIPOP portal was breached and the personal information of Nova Scotians was accessed. It's a fact that's well known, has been discussed many times in this House Assembly. Can the minister tell me on what page of the 12-page document does this breach appear?
The Honourable Minister of Internal Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for the question. As he pointed out, this report only covers until March. So it does not cover, unfortunately, when the breach occurred. But I am looking forward to hearing from the Auditor General and from the Privacy Officer when they conduct and complete their reports on the breach itself.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, you know, the breach happened in the year covered by this report. You think you might have put a footnote, an asterisk, something to underline the fact that it happened between March 3rd and March 5th, 2018, which is the time covered by this report. It shouldn't be ignored because the government's department took a month to find it. That's the point here, Mr. Speaker, that it took over a month for that government to find that it had breached or had a breached portal. They've tried to push this issue down the road, as they are in this one. They kept it out of public accounts. They punted it to the Auditor General. Will the minister commit to retracting and reissuing it with the details that are required?
The Honourable Minister of Internal Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to correct the member that this report does not cover when the breach was found out and what we have covered. So he is inaccurate in his statement that the report is accurate for the timeline given. And I would also like to assure the member and all members of this House that we are not trying to push down anything. We have worked in cooperation with the 2 independent sources who are looking at this particular breach, and we will continue to work with them, and we look forward to hearing their recommendations when those reports come out.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. Today, the 12 individuals who will form the Provincial Advisory Council on Education were appointed. The advisory body of political appointees is replacing democratically elected school boards. I was pleased to see that 133 individuals from across the province applied. However, it was frustrating that the committee responsible for making the appointments was not given any information about the selection process, how a shortlist was developed, or how the 12 appointees came to be presented. This lack of transparency naturally leads to speculation about the fairness of the process. Mr. Speaker, can the minister explain the criteria, selection and process he used to select these individuals, or can he provide them later to the members of this House?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In terms of the criteria we looked for, first and foremost was regional representation. Secondly was expertise in the field of education. We also wanted to have cultural diversity reflected, and we also followed through on the promise that we made through based on the NDP amendment to our legislation to have first voice on there as well for those with learning challenges in our education system, Mr. Speaker. And at the end of the day, I think we have a good quality group of people that represent a broad section of our province who have great expertise and experience that will help us make good decisions when it comes to education in the province of Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, with respect, I suspect more than 133 applicants might have met those criteria. Our caucus has raised over and over again our concerns about the complete lack of accountability and transparency within this new administrative model. We don't know how PACE members were selected, we don't know what role they will play, and the public cannot attend their meetings. That has nothing to do with the Westminster system, as the minister has previously claimed, and everything to do with the way that this government has chosen to conduct itself. Mr. Speaker, will the minister agree to make the meetings of the Provincial Advisory Council of Education open to the public so that parents can observe decisions being made that will impact their children?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For the member to suggest that there was anything untoward about this process, we followed the same exact process that all governments have followed with the appointments of boards and commissions. We followed that process to a T, which led to the final recommendations that were made to the all-party committee on HR. The all-party committee did delay the passage of those names because they had some further questions, which was fair and well within their right. I'm happy that the committee did decide to meet again this week so that we could get these people in place to begin the important work on helping us continue to make good, important decisions to improve the education system for students all across the province, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health and Wellness. Doctors Nova Scotia has released a paper on the changes they feel can help to recruit and retain doctors. It lists 6 measures that they feel can greatly improve the climate for doctors in this province. Though Doctors Nova Scotia has said that these measures were in no particular order, one can't help but read into their decision to list compensation first. Nova Scotian doctors are making $28,000 less than their counterparts in New Brunswick and 105 less than doctors in PEI. Today, the government revealed $71 million in unbudgeted expenses for the Department of Health. I'd like to know, did any of that go towards better pay for our doctors?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. I believe if the member looks closely at the data that she referenced, that comes from 2015-16 year, I believe. That figure does not take into account the nearly $40 million we invested into compensation and incentives for physicians in the province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
The problem is, Mr. Speaker, there's still over 100,000 people in this province without a doctor. The other 5 considerations from Doctors Nova Scotia were improved succession plan, better engagement with doctors, changes to billing audits, and less administrative red tape. This government likes to proclaim they are the fighters for red tape. They also proclaim to be the most open and transparent government in Canada, and you can take that for whatever it's worth to you. But, Mr. Speaker, most of these issues are low cost or no cost at all and are basically completely internal measures. So I'd like to know if the minister can tell me what is the holdup?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for the question. I'd like to assure the member that there is no holdup. In fact, we're working on many of those areas of concern with respect to things like red tape reduction, reducing some of the administrative burden. We've been taking steps in areas like the locum program to be more efficient, to provide some concierge-type services to help address the administrative steps for physicians who would be providing temporary services. That's what the locum program is all about. We've been taking steps like that with respect to the audits, Mr. Speaker. We do share the desire to have an educational component in the billing audits, Mr. Speaker. We've been reached out and we've engaged our billing services group to work with them to improve that side of things. But at the same time, Mr. Speaker, when the member suggests that there's no financial cost to these, I'm sure she's not suggesting that our audits not be comprehensive and complete at the same time.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Speaker, another question for the Minister of Health. There are thousands of Nova Scotians who need a family doctor. Many of them worry what will happen if they get sick and have no one to quarterback their care. You can only imagine the disappointment many of them felt when they learned that one young doctor left because the health authority couldn't figure out a way to keep her. And I'll table that story. Mr. Speaker, when so many people are desperate for a family doctor, why didn't the health authority work harder to keep Dr. Monica Dutt?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With respect to the recruitment efforts that take place across the province, I assure the member.
Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, with respect to recruitment and retention of physicians across the province, Mr. Speaker, the Nova Scotia Health Authority does work with physicians to help understand their concerns, to provide an appropriate working environment. But at the same time, Mr. Speaker, the government takes its role seriously as well. We've provided increased compensation as part of an almost $40 million investment earlier this year. Mr. Speaker, we are taking steps to help with the retention as well as the recruitment of physicians in this province.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, the minister's answer did absolutely nothing to help Dr. Dutt. Instead of helping her to find a practice to work out of, the health authority put that onus on her. Not very welcoming and not very effective. Dr. Dutt was hoping to work part-time in a family practice in Cape Breton. She was surprised when the health authority could not help her. She moved to Ontario. Does the minister accept any responsibility for this? Should he not be ensuring the people who ultimately work under his ministry are actually trying to help doctors wanting to serve the people in this province who need one?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I previously noted, we are taking steps throughout both the Department of Health and Wellness and our partners at the health authorities. Mr. Speaker, we have invested almost $40 million in increased compensation and incentives to help recognize the role that physicians play in providing comprehensive family care. We've created an incentive program to encourage physicians that are here to attach more patients off of our need a family practice list, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we continue with these investments. We continue to work with our education providers and partners to provide more opportunities for residents and trainees within the medical profession, and not just with physicians, Mr. Speaker. We're doing with other healthcare providers like nurse practitioners as well.
The Honourable Member for Inverness. Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our frontline paramedics and Nova Scotians from tip to tip recognise that the current system is failing those in their time of need. I, along with my colleagues, take our first responders very seriously. That's why I've risen in this House on countless occasions to advocate on behalf, only to be given a non-answer by our Health Minister. We need to improve their work environment and in the process improve the level of service Nova Scotians both expect and deserve. Paramedics don't need help today or tomorrow. They needed help yesterday. So my question to the Minister is this. When will the ambulance offload program at the Dartmouth General Hospital be implemented at other Nova Scotian hospitals?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have a date for when that's going to be rolled out. As I've previously mentioned here on the floor, work is ongoing in the analysis of that program. We know, certainly in the feedback that I've received from frontline healthcare professionals, paramedics, as well as nurses and physicians who work not just at the Dartmouth site, but paramedics from who provide services throughout the province, the metro region, that have commented on the difference they've seen, the improvements at the Dartmouth General. So, Mr. Speaker, that work is ongoing to make sure we have the information so we can roll it out successfully to other locations. And, Mr. Speaker, we continue to meet with the representatives that would be responsible for that work as a department.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Minister touts his Sunday drive with the area supervisor and now claims to be an expert on the struggles that many paramedics are facing on their job. But it isn't enough. It isn't enough to hear what paramedics have to say. He needs to experience it too, Mr. Speaker. He needs to experience a full 12-hour day so he can go on the calls and sit in the hallways of Nova Scotia hospitals, experiencing these offload delays, experience the frustrations they feel every day. And I would like to table this letter, Mr. Speaker, from the union, if it's not already on his desk. Mr. Speaker, it's not enough to hear about it. It's time for you to live it as well. So my question to the Minister is this. Will he sign the necessary confidentiality agreements and do what he promised to do in this House? He would do to participate in a full 12-hour shift.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it surprises me that the member opposite would suggest that listening to frontline healthcare workers like paramedics is not appropriate, Mr. Speaker, for me to do that. That their words, Mr. Speaker, that the paramedics...
Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Health.
That the member opposite...
Order, please. The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount will come to order. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That the member opposite would suggest that the feedback provided by frontline paramedics in the hospital system that I had met with, Mr. Speaker, in their bases, Mr. Speaker, as I toured around, Mr. Speaker, that he would suggest that their input and their feedback was not sufficient for me to understand their work conditions and the opportunities for improvements, Mr. Speaker. I think that's shameful and disrespectful for the work of those frontline healthcare workers, Mr. Speaker, because I found that input very valuable, and we've been taking that feedback and moving forward with it, and that's where I've mentioned the work at the Dartmouth General Hospital, which is what I heard directly from those frontline paramedics.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Yesterday, 2 family physicians leaving Digby published a letter explaining their reasons for relocating. In the letter, the 2 young doctors noted a lack of resources and physician burnout as major issues. In light of the physician's imminent departure, Digby General Hospital staff received notice that some of the health services may need to be adjusted as the NSHA recruits replacement physicians. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister identify which services will be adjusted and when they will be up and running again?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member would know, the letter that was published by these 2 physicians does outline a number of the concerns that they've raised. I think by my reading of it, one of the significant things as well that was highlighted was the personal circumstances of the physicians, Mr. Speaker, and what role that plays when they're making their decision of where to practice. We heard loud and clear from physicians throughout the last election campaign, Mr. Speaker. That's why we've brought more flexibility to allow physicians the opportunity to practice within the province. We've established a pool, Mr. Speaker, for vacancies to ensure that primary care access and physician services can be provided where and when needed.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
The doctors leaving Digby suggested that attracting locums and physicians who have roots in Digby or the surrounding communities is key to retention and recruitment. However, even doctors who are rooted outside of Halifax are finding it impossible to stay. Dr. Monica Dutt of Sydney recently left for Ontario after trying and failing to find part-time general family medicine work in Cape Breton. Mr. Speaker, anyone who works in healthcare in Cape Breton can tell you when recruitment was in the hands of the former district health authorities, we didn't have this kind of problem. Mr. Speaker, will the minister admit that taking power away from local communities has worsened the healthcare crisis?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, I wouldn't. What I would like to note, though, Mr. Speaker, is that...
Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I would note about the situation in Digby, and as the member noted, the important role of communities and maintaining attachments in communities like Digby. I'd like to acknowledge the work of my colleague, the member for Clare Digby. He's a member of a committee made up of municipal representatives from Nova Scotia Health Authority, very similar to the task force that's up in Cumberland County, working to highlight. I know my member has travelled with the committee to Sherbrooke, where there are a number of French members from the community in the region, to attract them back to their community, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank them, all those members in the community throughout the province, doing this kind of work to bring people back to their communities as part of the recruitment strategy.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. Last year, this government implemented pre-primary very, very quickly. The rush has caused a number of issues, as members of this House know all too well. The latest is that starting Monday, a dozen 4-year-olds are going to attend Fairview Junior High School, and I'll table that, Mr. Speaker. We already know that the play structures and issues around catchment areas exist. We can only imagine how many things are unsafe at a school that is designed for a different stage of education. My question to the Minister is this: does the Minister believe it's wise to send our pre-primary 4-year-olds to a junior high school?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And there is a fundamental difference between the opposition and us when it comes to pre-primary. We believe that early learning is critical to the success of each and every one of our students. And we are moving forward ambitiously to ensure that every single 4-year-old in this province and every single family has access to early learning in their communities. The area of Fairview, Clayton Park, has high needs in this area, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to deliver to that community along with every other single community in this province. At the same time we're doing that, we're also expanding the regulated childcare sector, Mr. Speaker, which has already expanded by 1,500 spaces in this province. That's something we can all be very proud of on this side of the House.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, there the Minister goes again. This government likes to paint every pre-primary discussion as either for the program or against the program. Mr. Speaker, the Minister, he leaves no room for the notion that the program is good, but it's the execution on the part of this minister that is lacking. Mr. Speaker, junior high school is a time when young people start experimenting and exploring. We all know this is a different stage of development that requires different resources and a different approach to teaching. But it's not the appropriate stage, it's not the appropriate place for 4-year-olds. There are many concerns. The junior high school level is simply not appropriate. My question is this, Mr. Speaker: could the minister update this House on what steps have been taken to prepare the students at the junior high school, and what steps have been taken to ensure proper program delivery for pre-primary? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We have engaged in an ambitious new social program for this province. We have successfully brought in over 3,000 4-year-olds into our early learning programming, Mr. Speaker. And yes, some of those classes are in junior highs, Mr. Speaker. But that's not to suggest that the incredibly trained staff, our early childhood educators in those schools can't provide safe learning environments, Mr. Speaker. To say otherwise is absolutely false and contrary to the facts and evidence that we have with the information that's come in today with pre-primary, Mr. Speaker. That party voted against pre-primary. They continue to attack that program, Mr. Speaker, and that is the difference between the Conservatives and Liberals.
The Honourable Member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, dialysis patients in Pictou County continue to patiently wait for increased services in their area. The last budget included new dialysis units for Bridgewater, Kentful, Digby, Glace Bay, but none for Pictou County. Presently, many dialysis patients in our county are left wondering why the minister is choosing other areas and ignoring the needs of Pictou County. The question to the minister: when will dialysis patients in Pictou County receive good news about an expanded local dialysis unit?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. happy to advise the House, Mr. Speaker, that the work that was done to identify locations of the sites, I believe 6 sites in total across this province, making up 48 additional beds across the seats, dialysis seats at those 6 sites. Was done as a review looking at the distance that people are traveling and the demands across the province. Those were the areas that were prioritized at that time. Work is underway, Mr. Speaker, to complete the renovations and implement those additional seats to provide care in those communities. As that work moves to completion, we'll continue to look at other opportunities to improve the dialysis treatment options for all Nova Scotians.
The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hope the minister understands that dialysis patients have enough on their plate without having to travel long distances to access service they deserve and pay for through their hard-earned tax dollars. With winter approaching, patients traveling to Antigonish face the uncertainty of weather, road conditions, and all the stress that brings. We all know it'll be several years before the Twin Highway will be a reality. A closed highway due to weather conditions could be disastrous for someone who needs regular dialysis. Question to the minister, will he commit to the citizens of Pictou County that there will be additional dialysis chairs added during next spring's budget?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've previously mentioned, work is underway in expanding 6 additional sites within the province, an additional 48 chairs of service being provided. As that work is continuing to proceed, we'll see what the impacts are on the dialysis demands and delivery throughout the province. But one thing, Mr. Speaker, I think is important to note for the member, and I think for all members here, if they have constituents who have to travel for dialysis, while not an option for all patients, Mr. Speaker, a home dialysis program is available as well. And I'd encourage all members, if they have constituents who are traveling, dialysis, if you don't know, does take a significant toll physically as well as the travel times and the time you're attached to the chair receiving the treatment, Mr. Speaker. So I encourage all members to let their constituents know about that service to look into if they're eligible.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. I am getting tired of having to mention in this House that I have the only constituency without a single family doctor. What upsets the people of my constituency even more is the knowledge that there are 50 collaborative health practices in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, there are 51 constituencies. Guess which one doesn't have one? I've already tabled Liberal election literature from 2017 that promised us a collaborative health centre for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage. Despite that promise, the 2017 budget identified the funding for other centres in the province. The question is, will the Minister of Health today commit, yes or no, to giving my constituency priority by fulfilling the Liberal election campaign promise of a collaborative health centre for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage in 2018?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the member's question. As the member would know, we've taken steps, and I believe some of the challenges with finding appropriate location for expanding services in her community, which we're continuing to work on with the addition of a nurse practitioner, Mr. Speaker, for her community. But in addition to that, Mr. Speaker, I want to let her and all members know that the popularity of these collaborative practices across the province, when the NSHA put out a request last year, I believe we had over 100 applications of practices throughout the province. That's a lot that they're working with to find opportunities to expand, Mr. Speaker. So the NSHA and the government are continuing to work to roll them out.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
So just to clarify for everybody listening, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to take that as a no for my constituents. I will remind the minister that I offered up my office. We have lots of space there. During my first sitting of the legislature, the Minister of Health agreed to my request for funding for a clinical nurse practitioner. I was overjoyed, and I thanked him at the time. At the time of my request, I had a clinical nurse practitioner ready to come. I had a health clinic ready to take her, and he gave me the funding. You would think it would have been a done deal, but it wasn't. It took over 2 months to have someone from the Nova Scotia Health Authority come out to look at the locations that we had identified, only to be told the room was too small and the flooring was the wrong kind. mind. Cannot begin to tell you how angry that made my constituency. It took another 2 months to get them to come out to the centre. The question to the Minister of Health is, can you explain what it has taken over 11 months to move the process along and why there is still no advertisement for a clinical nurse practitioner and there is still no one out in my constituency who can provide any health care?
Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My understanding is that work has proceeded on that position. The last time that I had checked, Mr. Speaker, in fact, I was at a collaborative practice that made note that the physicians at this particular collaborative practice had agreed to work with the Mr. Speaker, that they agreed to work with the nurse practitioner being identified to go in and work at a long-term care facility.
Please. The Honourable Minister of Health has the floor.
That the nurse practitioner will be working out of a long-term care facility within the community, Mr. Speaker. So that work, again, as I said, is underway to provide that service to the constituents of her community.
The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Labour and Advanced Education. The Minister dismisses the negative impacts of student debt on our province by saying his government eliminated interest on provincial loans. But his government is continuing to bring in revenue from student loan interest. Last year, it collected $6 million from people struggling to pay off student debt. And since coming into office, his government has taken $23 million from Nova Scotians by collecting interest from student loans. So will the minister admit that his government continues to profit from student debt, and a simple yes or no will suffice?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me great opportunity to point out what our government has done to support young Nova Scotians going to post-secondary education. Our government eliminated tuition fees for apprentices, Mr. Speaker. Our government went a further step and we made Nova Scotia student loans non-repayable upon graduation. We have one of the strongest programs in Canada. It is aimed at access, it's aimed at low-income individuals. But, Mr. Speaker, I will take my seat right now. I look forward to the member reading their next question.
The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I find that rather disrespectful to the students who are suffering here in Nova Scotia. And I have to say, when the NDP was in office, we introduced the Graduate Retention Rebate Program, which cost $50 million a year to help students stay in the province and pay down half of their debt. And these people got rid of it. So debt most severely impacts low-income students from marginalized communities. And a recent cross-Canada poll shows that LGBTQ students are more likely to be burdened by more debt, take a second job, have difficult sacrifices to pay off their debt. They're also more likely to avoid university altogether or even drop out without graduating. So I want to ask the minister, if his government really eliminated the interest on student loans, well then why will they be collecting $2 million more in student loan interest this year than when they first came into office?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to talk about the Graduate Retention Rebate. It was such a great program, Mr. Speaker, that I qualified to get it 3 years ago when I finished my MBA. Mr. Speaker, it made no sense. It made absolutely no sense. Over 90% of the money of that program went to students who were over the age of 30. Undergrads were not collecting the money because to do so, they had to make $40,000.
The Honourable Minister of Labour has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, what is laughable about that program, it was called retention, and we had young youth Nova Scotians leaving the province in droves. But now for the last 2 years, we have, for the first time since the 1980s, retained more youth than have left. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Northside, Westmount.
If that was as easy as it was, Mr. Speaker, to get rid of somebody, it would be a great project to invest in. Mr. Speaker, I, along with my colleagues in this House, have all shared stories about the two-tiered healthcare system that's taking place between those who have a family doctor and those who don't. One of my constituents who doesn't have a family doctor is in and out of the emergency room because she suffers from nausea, heart palpitations, and can't eat as a result. Mr. Speaker, she's lost over 60 pounds. As a result of not having a steady family doctor with each new visit to the emergency room, she sees a new doctor and is giving a new prescription. At one point, she even received a call from the pharmacist advising her not to take the pills because her interaction with the other medications may be fatal. So my question to the minister is this. Does he believe that Nova Scotians without a family doctor receive the same care as those who have a family doctor?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We certainly recognize the importance and the value of receiving, having an attached, comprehensive primary care provider for Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. That's why we continue to invest in programs and opportunities, increasing compensation and various incentive programs. But, Mr. Speaker, it's not just that. We're trying to make it easier to provide the care by providing incentives as well and new technology options. The member referenced the role of the pharmacist in primary care and the programs and the interaction of technology that allows them to monitor the prescriptions so that they can intervene, Mr. Speaker, to ensure the health and wellness of all Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And make no mistake, we have a doctor shortage in this province. And it's affecting our most vulnerable, our hard-working men and women, and our seniors in their most moment of need. The stories that I hear from my constituents each and every day are heartbreaking because the system has failed them and their government is failing them. Another constituent who is receiving income assistance has to spend $30 each way to travel to Cape Breton Regional Hospital because she doesn't have a family doctor and the emergency room at the Northside General is closed. She still hasn't recovered financially from the 4 visits she took in just 1 week alone. So my question to the Minister is this: does the Minister recognise that the closure of the Northside General is leaving our most vulnerable behind because they can't afford to travel to the regional?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The investments we're making in Northside as well as New Waterford are going to provide a new infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, new infrastructure which will help attract and retain physicians and other primary health care providers to provide care within those communities, Mr. Speaker. The type of care that will be provided includes the primary care services. You'll be able to have blood tests, Mr. Speaker, x-ray services, many of those services right there in their communities, Mr. Speaker. As well, that new infrastructure, as the member knows, will be very attractive. If the member questions whether or not new infrastructure will influence the decision of where new practitioners go, maybe he should ask his daughter whether she would prefer to work in a new or an old facility.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question today is for the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. On Tuesday, October the 12th last year, I asked the Minister a question about the condition and lack of maintenance around the provincial highway in the metro area. In particular, I voiced concerns about the state of the bridge located immediately off the Highway 101 leading to the Magazine Hill. The bridge, Mr. Speaker, has dropped below the road surface and is on a sharp turn. Could the Minister please update the House regarding the bridge and when thousands of Nova Scotians who use it might expect it to be properly repaired?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. Like all Nova Scotia highways, especially one that is widely used, as that one has, is constantly being scrutinized by our crew. And I appreciate the fact that this was brought up earlier, and we do have work scheduled for that section for this construction season.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Beaverbank.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Minister. People are questioning the integrity of the bridge itself, particularly whenever there's inclement weather, ice buildup, snow, rain. The issues on the bridge just seem to be emphasized to the commuters. It's almost a year, and last week I noticed that the asphalt was actually being removed from the bridge too, so maybe they are doing something. But it does appear that the bridge is still subsiding and sinking a little bit. Traffic in the area is really heavy. It continues to grow, and I'm just worried more cars, compromised bridge. It seems to be a bit of a recipe for disaster. Could the minister suggest to me if the bridge, if he doesn't know when the bridge is going to be fixed, I guess what I'd like to know is there any updates on the progress of the 107 bypass, which would certainly help to alleviate the pressure on this busy section of road?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member opposite for the question. I want to assure him and all Nova Scotians that we have a very rigorous bridge analysis program. A crew that is dedicated to the integrity of our bridges across the province, and this one is underway, and there will be work done to the bridge. As he mentioned, the member mentioned, there is evidence of work being done in this season. And with regards to the 107 bypass, Mr. Speaker, we are involved with working through the process. I'm happy to report that the EA has been approved by the Department of Environment, and we are currently engaged with an ordnance study with the Department of Defence to make sure that the area is cleared of any unexploded ordnance, and when we get that, we will have further updates. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Community Services. A constituent of mine recently attempted to apply for income assistance through the Department of Community Services. Mr. Speaker, this constituent was flagged for reapplication by the department, but unfortunately they never got that message. Instead, they assumed they had simply been denied. This series of events has resulted in a great deal of stress and confusion for the constituent. My question to the Minister is this. In cases where income assistance applicants are required to reapply, could the Minister walk us through the steps the department takes to get that message to applicants? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I want to thank the honourable member for the question. I do want to let him know that there was an inconsistency in some of our offices and we have been able to work with our staff to make sure that they understand that in cases where they need to reach out to an applicant, that they should try twice to call and then a letter follows up. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for her response. I'm saddened to think of the difference it could have made to my constituent if the information was received earlier. It's important to the people that use government services that the process be timely and transparent. As I'm sure the Minister would agree, seemingly minor errors on department files can have very serious impacts upon the lives of Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, is the Minister satisfied that her department's communication protocol with clients meets the highest standards of timeliness and transparency? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I want to thank the honourable member, and this does give me the opportunity to talk about the great work that people in the Department of Community Services do every day to make a difference in the lives of Nova Scotians they serve. We've been engaged in a transformation process, and I must say that folks have really engaged in this, and I do so appreciate the work that they have been doing. As I indicated to the honourable member, there was an inconsistency that was identified. If the honourable member would like to pass on the name to the person to me, we can have the department look into it further. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister responsible for housing. Our province needs more affordable housing. The 2018 Canadian Housing Index reported that Nova Scotia has the 4th unhealthiest rental market in the country, and the government has chosen to address this through rent supplements. That's a short-term solution and one that doesn't work in tight rental markets. Over 200 of the rent supplements that the Minister announced last year were supposed to be in place this year, but we're hearing that landlords are not accepting them. So my question for the Minister is precisely how many of the new rent supplements have resulted in someone being housed?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I want to thank the honourable member. As the honourable member would know, that was just announced earlier this year, so I don't actually have those statistics at my fingertips, but I would be more than happy to get them for her. It was, I believe, just before the summer when they were announced. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Speaker, the fundamental fact is that Nova Scotia needs more non-market housing. That means more public housing, not-for-profit housing, land trusts and co-ops. When this government came into power, there was a framework in place to take real action on affordable housing, but instead this government is pouring public money into an ineffective market solution through rent supplements. So my question for the Minister is, when can we expect to see the province invest in new affordable housing units?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I want to thank the honourable member for her question, and I do remember when that framework came in, and it was very thin gruel. There was nothing there. There was no there, Mr. Speaker. What we have done is we have reduced the housing wait list for 10% every year the last 3 years, and we will continue to reduce that housing wait list. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cumberland South.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, there are several students from this area that have gone abroad to study to become doctors in this province. Can the Minister of Health please explain how we're going to get those people back? And also, would he please retract his remarks from earlier?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The work that's ongoing with recruitment initiatives, I'd like to acknowledge the great work that the member, my colleague, the Minister of Immigration, has done introducing a new stream for family physicians, Mr. Speaker. It's been very successful. We had over 10 people join come to Nova Scotia as part of that.
Order, please. Time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has expired. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With respect to my second last response, I would like to offer my sincere apology to the member for Northside Westmount and retract that portion of the question response. What I would like to note there, Mr. Speaker, in replace of that is that, Mr. Speaker, I've heard from a young doctor, Mr. Speaker, who would prefer to work in a new facility instead of an old one.
We'll now move on to the Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, in this House at times, Mr. Speaker, there are times, Mr. Speaker, it's one thing when we're in here, I want to make, on behalf of this government, an apology. At no time should any of our children's names be brought up in this House at any time, no matter what they're doing. So on behalf of the government, I want to extend my apologies to the member from Northside.
We'll now move on to government business. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that you do now leave the chairs and the House resolve itself into a committee of the whole House on bills.
The House will now recess for a few minutes while it resolves itself into the committee of the whole House on bills.
The Committee of the Whole House on Bills will come to order. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would you please call Bill number 27, the Animal Protection Act?
I call Bill number 27, the Animal Protection Act. Bill number 27 has been called. I recognize the clerk.
Madam Chair, Bill number 27 has 49 clauses and was returned from the Committee on Law Amendments without amendments.
For the benefit of the committee, I want to explain that as we consider this bill and other bills that may be called at this meeting, we will be considering the bill in the form containing amendments already made by the Committee on Law Amendments. If I am asking this committee if a clause carries as amended, it will be referring to the amendments that have been moved during our debate in this committee. Is that agreed? I recognize. Shall clause 1 carry? I recognize the member for Cumberland South.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hearing from many law amendments and some very enthusiastic stakeholders, it's pretty evident that not every stakeholder was consulted during this whole process. The Canadian Kennel Club was completely overlooked, as was felt by many of the audiences that has called, and many of our offices have been emailed. Whether you like what they have to say or not, it's still a stakeholder that we need to hear from. Question the use of the word custodian versus owner. That leaves a wide range of definition. Even more importantly, the authority of the Act grants the SPCA officers, the arm of the law, if you will, in this case. The officers would have much more strength than we would see any child protection services. I believe there are many other people that do want to speak to this matter on this bill. Therefore, I will take my seat and we'll share this floor.
Shall clause 1 carry? Carry. Shall the remaining clauses carry? Carry. Shall the title carry? Carry. Shall the bill carry? Carry. The bill is carried. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would you please call Bill number 32, the Body Armour Control Act?
I call Bill number 32, the Body Armour Control Act. Shall clause 1, the Honourable Clerk.
Madam Chair, Bill number 32 contains 18 clauses and was returned from Law Amendments Committee without any amendments.
Shall clause 1 carry? Carry. Shall clause 2 to 3 carry? Carry. Shall clause 4 carry? I recognize the honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. If I can have the members' attention to change sheet CWHB PC1. I realize with these changes that the minister may indicate and speak to this and indicate that these changes could be covered in regulation, but it's just common sense today and practical to make changes now and include sports shooters, hunters, and bailiffs. So I would like to have everyone's attention, page 2, paragraph 4, 2B. A, subparagraph 2, line 2, strike out the semicolon, substitute a comma. B, add immediately after subparagraph 2 the following subparagraph. For number 3, sports shooters and hunters. Again, on page 2, paragraph 4.2c, A, add immediately after subparagraph 1 the following subparagraph. 2, A, a bailiff, and then B, renumber subparagraphs 2 and 3 as 3 and 4. And again, this is just common sense. I think it was just probably actually an oversight and a mistake. So let's correct the mistake here. It's not a big deal. I think it should go through. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to take a moment to recognize that we did have a bailiff who came to present at law amendments, who made the argument that bailiffs ought to be included in this bill. He also made the point, though, that bailiffs in Nova Scotia are not a regulated profession. There is no Bailiff Act, which there is in other provinces. I think he made a compelling argument for why bailiffs, and he spoke, I think, compellingly about his staff and the threats to safety that they face, and that his profession is a dangerous one. But he did also recognize that, you know, bailiff can mean a lot of things because it's not a regulated profession. So I would urge the minister to consider including bailiffs here, but also to consider bringing forward legislation around a Bailiffs Act because it does seem that that is overdue. Thank you.
I recognize the honourable member for Argyle-Barrington.
Thank you. And just to sort of expand on that issue of bailiffs, when the gentleman came and spoke before law amendments, he basically said, you know, as he hires on people, so he's a bailiff, special constable under the Act, under the Police Act. But when he hires new people, provides them with the training that he feels is required, they work for the company for a period of time, and then once he feels they're ready, then of course they write their test or whatever they need to do and become special constables. So he was worried about that time when he has employees that might not have their full special constable designations, that they would not be able to have the safety equipment that they would need to participate even in some of the training. They might be going out to ride along with another bailiff, to pick up merchandise, to to transport, deliver subpoenas, or all those things that bailiffs do. So it's sort of the issue of allowing this bill to allow bailiff companies maybe to allow them to use the body armor as they require. So that's my quick comments on that.
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Justice.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of quick comments. I certainly acknowledge and recognize the comments that my colleagues have referenced specific to bailiffs. The legislation itself allows for additional exemptions and permission for individuals to possess and wear these items. I do want to be careful, and I appreciate that the opposition House Leader presented these amendments to myself just prior to the commencement of committee. I think, to be sure, I want to be able to have the Department of Justice, a legal lens from our legal services, look at this to ensure, number one, that we're not duplicating what already exists within the Act, and recognize to my colleagues' comments from Pictou West specific to sports shooters and hunters, I just want to be sure that the list that we may modify to the point my colleague has made, I just want to be sure that we're not, again, omitting somebody. So the points that are raised are good in what my colleague has identified as additions, but I do believe necessary for legal services to put a brush on this, and to my colleague's point, know that we can address these changes in regulations if necessary. So I want to commit to both my colleagues, or all of my colleagues in opposition, that we will advance these proposals following discussions within legal services.
Does the amendment carry?
No.
The amendment is defeated. Shall Clause 4 carry?
Carry.
Shall the remaining clauses carry?
Carry.
Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? The bill is carried. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would you please call Bill number 38, Residential Tenancies Act?
I call Bill number 38, the Residential Tenancy Act. The Clerk.
Madam Chair, the Bill 38 contains 17 clauses and was referred back from law amendments with the following change on page 10 in what is proposed subsection 13 to capital A. In the first line, the word may was deleted and the word must was substituted.
Shall clause 1 carry?
Carry.
Shall the remaining clauses carry?
Carry.
Shall the title carry?
Carry.
Shall the bill carry?
Carry.
The bill is carried. That's a bad one. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would you please call Bill number 42, the Vital Statistics Act?
I call Bill number 42, the Vital Statistic Act. The Clerk.
Madam Chair, Bill 42 contains 8 clauses and was referred back from Law Amendments Committee without changes.
Shall clause 1 carry?
Carry.
Shall the remaining clauses carry?
Carry.
Shall the title carry?
Carry.
Shall the bill carry? The bill is carried. Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would you please call Bill number 44, the Change of Name Act?
I call Bill number 44, the Change of Name Act. The Clerk.
Madam Chair, Bill 44 contains 5 clauses and was referred back from the Committee on Law Amendments without amendments.
Shall clause 1 carry?
Carry.
Shall the remaining clauses carry?
Carry.
Shall the title carry?
Carry.
Shall the bill carry?
Carry.
The bill is carried. Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would you please call Bill number 45, the Senior Citizens Property Tax Rebate Act?
I call Bill number 45, the Senior Citizens Property Tax Rebate Act. The Clerk.
Madam Chair, Bill 45 contains 19 clauses and was referred back from Law Amendments Committee without amendments.
Shall clause 1 carry?
Carry.
Shall the remaining clauses carry?
Carry.
Shall the title carry?
Carry.
Shall the bill carry?
Carry.
The bill is carried. Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would you please call Bill number 48, an act to amend various statutes administered by Service Nova Scotia?
I call Bill number 48, the various statutes administered by Service Nova Scotia Act. The Clerk.
Madam Chair, Bill 48 contains 28 clauses and was referred back from Law Amendments Committee without amendments.
Shall clause 1 carry?
Carry.
Shall the remaining clauses carry?
Carry.
Shall the title carry?
Carry.
The bill is carried. Oh. Shall the bill carry? The bill is carried. Sorry. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that you do now rise and report these bills.
The motion is carried. The committee will now rise and report its business to the House.
Order, please. Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on Bills will now report.
That the Committee of the Whole House on Bills has met and considered the following bills. Bills 27, 32, 42, 44, 45, and 48 without amendments. Bill 38, which was reported with certain amendments by the Committee on Law Amendments to the Committee of the Whole without further amendments. And the Chairman has been instructed to recommend these bills to the favourable consideration of the House.
Order that these bills be read a third time on a future day. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call public bills for second reading?
We'll now call public bills for second reading.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 55, the Region of Windsor and West Hants Municipality Act?
We'll now call Bill number 55, the Region of Windsor and West Hants Municipality Act. The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that Bill number 55, the Region of Windsor and West Hants Municipality Act, be read for a second time. Mr. Speaker, this legislation will allow the Town of Windsor and the municipality of the District of West Hants to take the next step toward consolidation. This past July, the Town of Windsor and the municipality of the District of West Hants passed motions agreeing to enter into negotiations to consolidate the two municipalities through legislation. It was their shared wish that the process be completed by December 31st, 2020. Both Windsor and West Hants have long and rich histories, Mr. Speaker. Councils for these communities realize the benefits of coming together and using their collective resources to respond to opportunities that are in the best interest of their residents. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, with this consolidation, citizens of the area will benefit from more effective decision-making in many areas, including land use, infrastructure, and economic development. The situation is unique because the regional government will consist of only Windsor and West Hants. Typically, under the Municipal Government Act, the regional government would be formed from all of the municipalities in a particular county. In this case, only Windsor and West Hants wish to consolidate, which requires a separate piece of legislation to allow this process to proceed. Mr. Speaker, this legislation will address transitional matters and will allow for the voluntary consolidation of these two municipalities. It outlines the appointment of a transition coordinator and establishment of a transition coordinating committee, and the responsibilities of the coordinator and the coordinating committee. The transition coordinator will lead the committee and will also be responsible for applying to the Utility and Review Board to determine the number of councillors within the regional municipality and the location of polling districts. The committee itself will consist of the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor of Windsor and the Warden and the Deputy Warden of West Hants. Once the committee is formed, Mr. Speaker, members will begin the complex work of bringing these two municipalities together. Matters which require research will need to be identified and studies will be completed in various areas. It is anticipated that this consolidation will be complete by April 2020, in time for the beginning of a new fiscal year. Upon incorporation of the new regional municipality, the provisions of the Municipal Government Act will apply. I should add, Mr. Speaker, that Windsor and West Hants are committed to communicating regularly with the community and ensuring that citizens are engaged throughout the process. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to support efforts that result in more collaboration among Nova Scotia's municipalities. I'm hopeful that this consolidation might inspire other municipalities to do the same. I want to commend the leadership shown by the councils of Windsor and West Hants. Bringing about change has its challenges. These councils want the best for their citizens. They see the future opportunities that could exist for their area, and they've shown tremendous resolve as they embark on the consolidation process. I believe that the people of the area will be very well served under a regional government, and that there is a strong and optimistic future ahead for United Windsor and West Hants. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sackville-Beaverbank.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I won't speak long on this one. I think that we do support, it's obvious that these two councils are coming forward. It's something that they've debated and that they are supporting, and it's probably in the best interest of both of them. So we're not really going to oppose much of this. What I would like to point out, though, I do find that I'm kind of confused, Mr. Speaker, as to why the province is bringing this forward, this legislation, at this particular time. And if I can note, Mr. Speaker, I note that there is currently a application before the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board to actually have this heard. This was debated by these councils back in July, and there was an application that's been brought forward by a independent community group to the UARB, which is to be heard next month. And I guess what my concern is I'm not quite sure why the government's bringing this legislation forward now, because that will take that process. Basically, we're a month away, but yet that whatever that becomes mute, they won't even hear it through the UARB. So I'm kind of concerned why the government's pulling this now and not letting that process go through. I do recognize that the proposal that's before us right now does not, although it does identify that there will be some public consultation and public meetings in regards to it. It also notes that there'll be no plebiscite and that residents have no opportunity to vote. And you know, whenever we take away the opportunity of our constituents to be able to be heard, I do have some concerns in regards to that. I also would note that when this was discussed between these two councils, I would feel much more comfortable with this process and the piece of legislation that's before us if it had been a unanimous vote of those councils. Unfortunately, it was not unanimous. And in fact, one of the councillors, Debbie Francis, she actually was quoted, and I have that here, so I'll table it, Mr. Speaker, that if she said, for me, we've had more information as individual council for chickens and livestock than we've had about this to let our residents know, and I think they need to be informed. So it doesn't seem like there is unanimous support of councils, and I'm a little concerned about why we're doing it this way at this current time. I do want to recognize that I note that there is $500,000 that's allocated to help the two municipal units in amalgamating, and I think that that's a good thing. I do support that as well. I'm also curious. I also note that Ms. Francis, in the same article that I'll be tabling in a minute, she also pointed out that in April of 2018, the province did not support amalgamation. And so that further leads me to question why we're at this point in time now, when there is currently a process already in with the UARB. Why is the government bringing this forward now? Is it so that there doesn't have to be a plebiscite, or you know, I'm curious to see about that. That's my only concern, is to make sure that that the public are heard. So hopefully it'll be a very good engagement process. I just before I sit down, I do want to note, I always find I understand that this takes place as of April 1st, and that the reason for that being that that's the start of a new fiscal year. But I always thought it was funny when I was on HRM Council and amalgamation occurred there April 1st as well, Mr. Speaker, and I always just used to joke that that was April Fool's Day. So I hope this isn't a fool's case here as well. So thank you.
Fine to recognize the Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs. It will be to close second reading of Bill number 55, the Region of Windsor and West Hants Municipality Act. The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the member opposite's comment. Specifically those around the time frame, what he may not realize is it takes a fair bit of time to implement a transition, set up the rules around all of that. We would be looking at a new governance structure. Mr. Speaker, they have to go to the URB, as I think I stated in my opening comments, to help set that process up. That all takes a bit of time. He also mentioned the current process that is underway. My understanding, Mr. Speaker, this is Thursday. On Tuesday evening, the town of Windsor, who was part of that initial application to the UARB around amalgamation, withdrew those motions at council. So going forward, that I don't know whether the ARC group has done that yet or not, but it's my understanding that that could happen. Either way, this is able to go forward even along with that at the same time. But, Mr. Speaker, the main reason that these two municipal units chose this path was so that they could have a say in how this would all end up, Mr. Speaker. That's important to those councils and to those communities, not letting an independent body decide how all things may look. So the best interest of they and their citizens and their communities and those councils is to have good input, Mr. Speaker, on where this may all end up and where it will all end up. The fiscal year certainly was important around April 1, 2020. So that again is part of all of that timing, Mr. Speaker. So I do want to thank the honourable member for his comments, and I'm sure he'll understand, being a former councillor as he once was, how this process does work. And those two councils have been working hard together along with our team. Our transition team will soon come into place. That is an extensive piece of work, Mr. Speaker, that we indeed hope will be extremely successful as they go forward. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few comments, I want to thank the members again, and I move to close second reading of Bill number 55.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 55, the Region of Windsor and West Hants Municipality Act. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 55, entitled An Act to Incorporate the Region of Windsor and West Hants Municipality.
Ordered that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call Bill number 58, Municipal Government Act and Halifax Regional Municipality Charter, an act to amend.
We'll now call Bill number 58, the Municipal Government Act and Halifax Regional Municipality Charter. The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Bill number 58, an act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act, and Chapter 39 of the Acts of 2008, the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter, be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to provide comments today on proposed amendments to the Municipal Government Act and the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter that will require municipalities to plan for efficient use of all land within their boundaries. Municipal planning helps to protect the public interest, including public health and safety, ensures that the public has input into the development of their community, reduces conflicts, protects the environment, considers the efficient use of land and infrastructure, thereby reducing servicing costs, and provides more regulatory certainty for investors. Mr. Speaker, under the new amendments, municipalities will be required to create land use plans to meet specific requirements. These requirements will reflect a minimum threshold set out in regulation, and municipalities can do more if they so choose. The amendments will also require municipalities to consult with their neighbouring communities when adopting or amending their plan. Recognizing that one size does not fit all, municipalities will be required to develop their own policies on how this consultation will take place. Ultimately, the goal of this consultation is to enable municipalities to work with their neighbours and better coordinate development opportunities. In addition, these amendments will ensure that all land use plans adhere to the existing statements of provincial interest. Statements of provincial interest are adopted as regulations under the Municipal Government Act and outline the province's vision for protecting Nova Scotia's land and water resources. They also address issues related to the growth of our communities, and they are intended to help provincial government departments and municipalities make land use decisions that support the principles of sustainable development. The 5 statements reflect the public interest: preserving high-quality farmland, preventing development on known floodplains, protecting municipal drinking water supply areas, providing for affordable housing, and making the best use of our investments in existing infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, currently the Municipal Government Act and the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter do not require municipalities to plan, although all municipalities do engage in some degree of planning. However, 12 of the 50 municipalities in Nova Scotia, this planning is limited in scope or in geography. Furthermore, municipalities that do not plan for all land within their boundaries are not addressing the statements of provincial interest. The current land use planning regime in Nova Scotia, including the municipal land use planning powers and the statements of provincial interest, have been in place for the last 20 years. These amendments are about recognizing that inconsistent implementation of land use planning creates regulatory uncertainty, whereas efficient land planning can help enable communities to grow. Mr. Speaker, I see good land use plans as supporting economic development by having land available for further enabling municipalities to be more business ready. In addition, Nova Scotia's land and water resources are fundamental to our physical, social, and economic well-being, and it is important to make land use decisions carefully and respect the needs of future generations. This work is, in part, driven by the requests we have received over the last 6 years from our stakeholders, including the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities and the Town's Task Force. Information has been gathered from these organizations, and research has been undertaken by the Department of Municipal Affairs, culminating in a series of regional sessions hosted throughout the province earlier this year. Mr. Speaker, this Act creates the framework for the development of minimum contents, requirements for land use planning documents, which will be defined in regulation. We recognize that different municipalities have different natural, social, and economic environments. The regulations will set out topics for which municipalities will have to develop policy. We will continue to work closely with our municipal partners to determine the minimum standards for regulation. We will also ensure that we support municipalities that do not conduct comprehensive plans by providing guidance and sample planning documents to support their efforts. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sackville-Beaverbank.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And once again, I rise. Our caucus is relatively supportive of this particular piece of legislation as well. I know myself individually, I'm very supportive, Mr. Speaker, of land use planning. I've seen the many benefits that having a comprehensive plan and direction are to a municipality to ensure that they develop well and that local interests are met but yet not duplicated. In this particular case, I do note that most of the issues that are being here are our provincial interest more so than municipal, being those of floodplains, housing, agriculture, portable water, and things like that. Now, having gone through on my time on Halifax Regional Council, having gone through both a regional plan process, a RP5 review process, as well as numerous local community visioning processes, I certainly do stand by the need for planning. So we are relatively supportive of this right now. I'm glad to hear the minister is talking in regards to the consultation that will take place. I know that, as the minister did suggest, that there are currently 38 of the 50 municipalities do have some kind of comprehensive planning and land use bylaws in place. However, I am kind of somewhat curious about the 12 and concerned about the 12 that do not. And I know that most municipalities across the province have some form of limited planning, but just not the comprehensive planning we're discussing here today. But I would assume that there's a reason why those 12 do not have that. You know, maybe it's because the current under their current mandate, the responsibilities that they currently have them stretched somewhat thin. So although I do see that there is some support that the department is offering guidance and support to the municipalities, unfortunately what I don't see is some funding that may be available for those municipalities that may not be able to afford to go through this process, not because they don't identify it as an important process, but because they have other responsibilities that have higher priorities in planning. And, you know, given the fact that this is an initiative of government and it is being done to, in addition to the municipal benefits that will be gained, it's also being done to protect provincial interests and to you know, it would be nice to see some finances set aside for that as well. I would note I did read in the there that although it is a request of the municipalities, it's not a requirement. So I'm kind of wondering maybe the minister at some point in time can talk on that as well. I'd also like to note that I know that it is supported by both HRM as well as the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities, and it's funny though, Mr. Speaker, I would be very remiss, particularly given my comments in the House yesterday in regards to cannabis, not to point this out. So. Here we are once again, Mr. Speaker, coming forward, and I believe the minister was quoted in the Chronicle Herald on Tuesday saying that mandatory planning supports a consistent approach to land use and development across the province. And I do support that, and I support this for that, but I do find it somewhat ironic that yesterday here I stood saying that these are the types of things we should be doing. We did this with smoking, we did this with pesticides, now here we are doing it with this, but we didn't do this with cannabis. But I certainly look forward to what's said at law amendments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's important to have legislation like this that requires all municipalities to have municipal planning strategies. And those planning strategies, when this piece of legislation passes, will need to meet minimum standards, and they'll need to include the process to consult with neighbouring municipalities. Strong land use planning is vital to many aspects of Nova Scotia's future, Mr. Speaker, from economic development to food security and climate change mitigation. And Mr. Speaker, I represent represent an area that definitely seen that better planning, strategic planning with development would have been welcomed many years ago. Sackville, of course, some 40, almost 50 years ago, was a development that the government recognized the need for housing options for Nova Scotians. But unfortunately, what happened is they just went and cut a bunch of trees down and put roads in everywhere as they could. And some 40, almost 50 years later, we're still dealing with issues of not planning properly around environmental impacts, Mr. Speaker, flooding and building on floodplains, the increase in development and its impact on the services like water and sewer, Mr. Speaker. We still continue, today have many houses a flood after a rainstorm because of the capacity and the inability of the municipal services to meet that capacity, Mr. Speaker. Also, just to note, for many years, airline pilots, for example, would know they're getting close to the airport when they would see this red mud lake known as First Lake, Mr. Speaker, because of all the runoff from all the streets would just flow right into First Lake. Over the years, many organizations like Friends of First Lake and Sackville Rivers Association have worked to mitigate the impact that on the environment like First Lake due to runoff, and it's pilots don't use the lake as that red mud lake as an indicator that they're close to the airport. But it just shows the importance of making sure that we have municipal planning strategies in place, especially as we develop and as we look at new development around our province, Mr. Speaker. So we look forward to hearing what anybody has to say at law amendments, but we'll make sure that we do our due diligence and ensure that this bill is as good as it can be, and it addresses some of the needs and concerns that we see around the province when dealing with municipal planning, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Time to recognize the Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs will be to close second reading of Bill number 58, the Municipal Government Act and Halifax Regional Municipality Charter. The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank both of my colleagues for their comments on this bill. One of the statements was around provincial interest was stressed. Remember, the provincial interest is indeed the public's interest, Mr. Speaker. This is about a consistent approach. There was mention around the 12 that don't have significant planning. However, they do have some minimal planning. Some of them share, Mr. Speaker. We certainly encourage them to share planners if need be across borders, and we'll continue to do that. We'll be here to offer them some assistance as we make our way through this, Mr. Speaker, by way of models. So I guess with those few comments here in second reading, Mr. Speaker, I would move to close second reading of Bill 58. Thank you.
The motion is for second reading of Bill number 58, the Municipal Government Act and the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 58, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act, and Chapter 39 of the Acts of 2008, the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter.
Ordered that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call Bill number 63, Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition Commission Act.
We'll now call Bill number 63, the Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition Commission Act. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to support Bill 63, an act to repeal the Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition Commission Act. Our government is repealing the legislation as a step towards sustainability in the current Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition site in Bible Hill. The current legislation has been in effect since 2015. Since then, the Commission continued to accumulate debt and face financial challenges for operations. We expect the repeal of the Act will be proclaimed when the wind-up activities of the Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition are completed. Today's action is intended to enhance the profitability and accountability for organization and contributing to a long-term stability. Wind up the current operations together with a plan to revitalize the property will put it on the right path as a strong economic driver in the community. Under new management, the provincial Nova Scotia exhibition was held on August the 13th, 2018, was the most successful one we've had in years. Very profitable. Those few words, Mr. Speaker, I would move second reading of Bill number 63.
The honourable member for Cumberland South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first and foremost, I do want to recognize the Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition. It's a steadfast for that area, not only that area, but all of the central of the Maritime provinces, as the representative from that area would know. We went to a bill briefing, Mr. Speaker, and we didn't get a bill, we got pictures. And when we received the bill yesterday, it was 2 lines. Now, we've learned more now from the minister today than what's actually entitled in that bill. I feel we really can't support this bill until we see the meat and potatoes. What's the structure going to look like in the future? Is there going to be a Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition in the future? Where's the accountability and where's the transparency? And I'm pretty sure that the member from that area has a few words to say. Therefore, I'll take my seat. I can't wait to look into this matter further and see law amendments. Thank you.
The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, I am pleased to rise to speak to Bill 63, an act to repeal Chapter 7 of the Acts of 2015, the Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition Commission Act. I have to say I'm a little concerned because there is no mention in this bill at all of the Truro Raceway. It's basically just a repeal of the existing bill, and I know that the bill was originally put in by, I believe, the Conservatives to create a structure that would help to conduct business for the Provincial Exhibition Commission. It created a commission, but also for the Truro Raceway. And over the years, I've been a little bit concerned since, well, when I first became an MLA in 2009, people came to me and said, you know, there's an old boys club that exists right now with the board, the commission of the Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition, whereby a lot of people are in there who keep staying in there, and then the way that it was structured, the bill was structured, they could just appoint other people to take their places, which meant that a lot of other community members were not able to even have any say or get on the board. And it became a very, let's say, a political thing, because a lot of Conservatives said that the Liberals had taken over, and they were concerned because they couldn't get on. And of course, while being NDP, there was no chance of anybody getting on anything. At that point, I was just lucky enough to be voted in for the first time ever in the history of that riding as an NDP. So, thank you. So, you know, I have to say that when I was in government in 2013, I introduced an amendment to the bill to make it easier for anybody in the community to be able to get on the board, to be able to get on the commission. You didn't have to be already on the commission to then, you know, appoint or anoint somebody to replace you. Anybody could be there, because I thought it should be a community board, a community commission, so that the community had a say in what was happening to that very valuable, not only piece of land, but also a community place for people to come to have both the Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition, but also the Truro Raceway, which is one of the oldest raceways in Canada. And there's a lot of passion around both in our community. So when, after the 2013 election, when the Liberals came in, the minister ended up changing and amending that bill yet again, and putting in a commission that was chosen by him. And that particular group of people, for whatever reason, we're told did not work out. So they were then eliminated. And for the last year, it's been basically operating, I would say, I don't know if it would be illegal, but I did ask the minister during budget estimates, what is the situation now that he had eliminated the board? He had dismissed the board, but yet they had chosen a couple of people to run the place, including somebody who is called the manager. But I was able to find out, luckily, from the minister that, in fact, she wasn't really the manager. She was really a caretaker because the bill was still on the books and had not been changed. So I was told that the bill was going to be amended, and I expected that to happen earlier, like in the spring, which it didn't. So I'm a little surprised that now it's just a repeal of the bill with nothing else in there, which basically means that now the government is going to be running the whole kit and caboodle. It's going to be in charge and running the whole kit and caboodle. And I noticed that yeah, that it will mean that the government will own the property except for the Horsemen's Club, the Horse Owners Club, which they have tried to buy a few times now and have been rebuffed. So I'm pleased to see that there is work being done on the property. I'm pleased that things have gone well this year. We've been very luckily blessed with good weather, which makes a big difference for the Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition, trust me. And I'm glad to see that things seem to be moving in a good orderly direction. However, I am worried and concerned that the Nova Scotia, the Truro Raceway is not mentioned anywhere. And during budget estimates, there was not even a line in the budget that described anything for the money that goes to the Truro Raceway. And when I asked about that, I was told that it's just a flow through from the finance department that helps to pay for the 3 raceways in Nova Scotia. And I've also heard through newspaper stories that the minister has said on a number of occasions, well, the Truro Raceway, they're not doing as well as the other raceways. The other raceways do better, and things like this. So I am concerned that we could be on a slippery slope to elimination of the Truro Raceway without anything to protect them. And I know that both the Raceway and the Provincial Exhibition were in difficult financial straits over the last number of years. But I do not want to see the Truro Raceway disappear. And I know that there are a lot of people in the community who feel the same way. And so I reserve my judgment at this point in time. I'd like to hear more about what the minister actually has planned, and I would like to be able to feel secure that the raceway will in fact be protected and will be continuing on into the future. So with those words, I will take my seat and I will reserve judgment. But as the MLA for that district, I'm very concerned and I want to find out a lot more before I can commit to saying I approve of this bill. And that goes for us here on the NDP caucus. Thank you very much.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Agriculture will be to close second reading of Bill number 63, the Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition Commission Act. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just before I move second reading, I would like to address the concerns of my colleague from Truro Bible Hill. And indeed, we totally intend to maintain the horse racing and improve on it over the next few years. We're looking at that very seriously. It's a part of Nova Scotia's culture and heritage, and that track is the key track in the province, not only in the province but in Atlantic Canada, for preserving and improving horse racing. I believe that the organization, the Horsemen's Association, is doing very well this year, probably the best they've done in years and years because of the good financial planning they put in place when we empowered them to do that. We look forward to that continuing and improving all the time. As you said, there's been a lot of improvements on the exhibition. We're going to continue to do that, improve it even further. We've really been very happy with the cooperation we've got from the Village of Bible Hill. They've worked with us very closely. We're going to form a very strong partnership with them. And the idea is we want to make that not only a fantastic place for agriculture in Nova Scotia, including harness racing, we also want to fix the facilities so people that live around the community are proud of the buildings and of the place. When we took it over, that wasn't the case. With a lot of buildings had to be taken down. We've taken 4 buildings down so far. We're evaluating other buildings. We're going to see some more improvements in buildings very shortly. And the only way we can do this is by the government owning the facility. And we're going to own the facility. That's what's going to happen. And I think it's very positive. Over generations, I've been an MLA for 25 years now, or in politics for 25 years. And every year I remember the presentation of the check to bail out the poor management, year after year after year. We're not doing that anymore. We've got a slim team that are working. We hire contractors to do the work. Very positive story for Truro, an extremely important story for Nova Scotia as we move our economy forward and really embrace agriculture, and part of that is harness racing. Harness racing will be there and be stronger than it ever has been in the past. With that, I'd like to move second reading of Bill number 63.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 63, the Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition Commission Act. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary minded, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 63, entitled An Act to Repeal Chapter 7 of the Acts of 2015, the Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition Commission Act.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That concludes government business for today. I move that the House do now rise to meet again tomorrow, Friday, September 28th, between the hours of 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. Following the daily routine in QP, business will include second reading of Bill 67 and third reading for Bills 27, 32, 38, 42, 44, 45, and 48.
Motion is for the House to adjourn to rise again tomorrow, Friday, September 28th, between the hours of 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary minded, nay. The motion is carried. The House now stands adjourned until tomorrow at 9 a.m.